Howdy everyone. Welcome to today's video on Ohio in the 2026 primary election analysis series. Every U.S. state has different rules, procedures, and voting days for their primary election. These rules change over time, all adding to the complexity of our primary election process. The goal of this series is to help educate my fellow Americans on this information as best as I can. With this information, I hope to get the country moving back in the correct direction, a nation that respects international law and human rights. Granted, that really has never been the United States. Our history is filled with war crimes and various human rights abuses. Since the start of Trump's Epstein war against Iran, war crimes have been committed daily by Israel and its vassal state, the United States. Elections have consequences. The actions of the fascist Trump regime should have hopefully made that very clear, despite that it should have already been clear after the disasters in George W. Bush's wars in the Middle East, or any of our war crime intervention wars from previous decades. The actions happening now are a direct result of Biden's failures in his final 16 months in office. The failure of not stopping Israel's genocide of Palestine. The Democratic Party has refused to address the real reasons for their 2024 election loss. To be clear, since they won't, the majority of blame for the 2024 election loss belongs to Kamala Harris, her campaign, and the party. In every election, it is the candidate's responsibility to go out and earn the most votes to win. For over 10 years now, the Democratic Party and the DNC have done the opposite. They have berated Americans and act as if our votes are owed to them. Biden refused to step aside for an open primary while supporting Israel's genocide. Then, Kamala ran a terrible campaign, refusing to distance herself, both from Biden's policies figuratively, and Liz Cheney literally. Those are only a few reasons, out of the dozens, for their 29% approval rating. I understand not wanting to vote for Democrats when they have been uninspiring, to say the least. But as mentioned earlier, by not participating in elections, our whole planet, all of us, are now on the expedited path to mass extinction. Congress should have acted by now and impeached Trump. Here's why they haven't. In the United States, out of our 535 congressional representatives, the majority are soulless, empty vessels manipulated by corporate and Israeli interests in the Epstein class. This did not happen as a result of the 2024 election or the last several elections. This has been a concentrated effort by the Epstein class for decades. As I see it, we only have two nonviolent options. The violent option would most likely be a massive failure with unknown death and destruction in the process. If there was enough organization around a general strike that could bring the economy to a halt, we could potentially see some demands being met to improve conditions. Unfortunately, the fascist robber baron Epstein class probably has the resources to outlast a general strike. Most Americans don't have enough money saved up for several months of rent and food payments without income. That then leaves us with the democratic election process that still exists for now. We must elect a brand new Congress to impeach Trump, abolish ICE, and begin the process to hold everyone responsible for the crimes against humanity. Does this plan have flaws? Of course it does. Our country is corrupt and filled with fraud. There remains the what-if scenarios. What if Trump cancels the elections or deploys troops and ICE Gestapo to polling places? These are valid questions. I hope governors are working with their respective Department of States and election officials to secure these elections from federal thugs. However, I suggest we address that when and if it happens, and plan and organize as if elections will happen. The election processes are still in place and are controlled at the state and local levels of government. It is decentralized enough that the American people still have a say in who our representatives are. For those who say voting isn't important or that your vote doesn't matter, you are simply incorrect. If voting didn't matter, billions of dollars would not be spent to influence election outcomes. Trump and Republicans would not be pursuing every effort to rig the elections. To stop that from happening, we need a large enough voter turnout to make the results too big to rig. That will only happen if there are enough candidates who win their primary elections to inspire more people to vote in November. These requirements for the secular lefty approved candidates are on screen now. The candidates I spotlight in this series must demonstrate they sincerely believe and will fight for at least one of the policies listed, support for more obviously being preferred, For the 2026 midterms, for as long as our current Congress remains spineless, the first priority I want to hear out of every Democratic candidate, or any independent or third party candidate, party doesn't matter, the message does. And that message better be to impeach Trump and abolish ICE. That's obviously not the full message. Each candidate should, of course, have their own additional campaign messaging after that, but it better start with impeach Trump and abolish ICE. For those looking for what kinds of political groups to trust when looking for candidates to support, here are a few that I trust when looking for secular lefty approved candidates. While not every approved candidate is supported by every group listed here, and I am not affiliated with any of these groups, I spotlight them in this series to inform you as potential voters. When you research candidates, check if any of them have been endorsed by these groups. Endorsements aren't everything, but knowing which groups to trust is vital right now. On the subject of impeaching Trump, that is the primary objective for citizens' impeachment. Their courage candidates are committed to pursuing impeachment of Donald Trump on day one of their term. Additionally important is ending military and financial support to Israel as they pursue their genocidal campaigns against everyone in the region they view as in the way of their greater Israel project. As Track AIPAC shows in this image, the majority of both Republicans and Democrats in the House are funded by the Israeli lobby, 329 in total out of 435 seats. Our government works for Israel, and we need to change that. Track AIPAC has helped bring to light the money trails that fund these candidates. There are several other groups on screen here we have discussed in previous episodes, and some new ones. Two new ones here are Progressive Victory and the Peace, Accountability, and Leadership PAC, or PALPAC. These are both new progressive organizations helping candidates at the federal level. Progressive Victory and organizations like Working Family Party also endorse trustworthy candidates at the state and local levels. The last shout out goes to the Sunrise Movement, a group dedicated to building a movement of young people to end billionaire rule and stop the climate crisis. Individually, our power, our ability to change the world around us is limited. However, the more of us working together in solidarity could be our way out of this mess. I am not guaranteeing it will work, but it is still worth trying. Links to these groups and approved candidates we discuss will be in the video description. With all that stated, let's now discuss the state of Ohio, their primary election process, and which candidates, if any, are secular lefty approved. Ohio is a state with an average U.S. population just under 12 million people. This population size gives them 15 seats in the House up for election. Normally, Ohio would not have a Senate seat up for election this year. However, the current Senator, Republican John Husted, was not elected to that seat. He was appointed by Republican geriatric Governor Mike DeWine after J.D. Vance vacated the seat to be vice president of the Epstein War Crime Administration. Because of that and Ohio law, the remainder of the Senate term is determined by a special election that will take place within the regular midterms. Before talking more about these individual seats, let's first discuss the primary election process the candidates must navigate to win. The information provided from Ballotpedia here tells us that Ohio state law requires closed primary elections. What that means is that all registered voters in the state must be affiliated with a party to vote in their primary election. What closed primaries does is silence the voices of independents and other non-affiliated voters. While you may not want to register with a party in closed primary states, this is what is required for you to vote in the primary elections. Millions not participating in this primary process is what allows AIPAC and U.S. corporations to push through their preferred corrupt candidates in both parties into the general election. When that happens, as it so commonly has, Americans are then correct about the general election when they say voting doesn't matter. The Epstein oligarchs have won, we lost. So this year, in 2026, don't allow them victories in the Democratic primaries. To win the primary elections in Ohio, candidates will need a plurality of votes with no minimum requirement. There will be no runoff elections for these candidates. They have one chance to convince voters they are the best candidate to represent their interests. In some races, there might be 10 or more candidates running. The winning candidate that moves on to the general election may only win around 25% of the vote. But if that is the most of any candidate, then that's enough to win. If you are an eligible voter in Ohio, This next bit of information is very important. This is from the National Center of State Legislatures. If you are not registered to vote or need to change party affiliation to Democrat, you have 30 days before the election to register, and you can register online. However, after April 5th, you will be unable to change your voter status and unable to support a secular lefty approved candidate in the May 5th primary elections. That would be a shame. So go get that voter registration taken care of after this video. Looking back at the state overview, the majority of seats are controlled by Republicans, and all of the seats are controlled by AIPAC-backed Epstein-class serving politicians. Voters in Ohio, I hope with this video we can flip a few of these. Let's start with where the seats will remain lost. 2 AIPAC Democratic districts, Amelia Sykes in 13th District and geriatric Marcy Kaptur in the 9th, are both running unopposed in their primaries, and neither district have an independent or third-party option at this moment. It would appear Marcy Kaptur, who is 79 and has been in Congress since 1983, is clearly hell-bent on dropping dead in office. Marcy isn't the only one, as fellow geriatric incumbent 75-year-old Joyce Beatty runs in the 3rd. At least in the 3rd district, there is a primary challenger we will talk about. For the Democratic primary in Ohio, there are only 6 candidates for the 15 House seats and the Senate seat that meet the secular lefty approved requirements. For the rest of the candidate options out there, it's possible I may have missed information. So when I say the remaining candidates in the other Ohio districts are NICs, an abbreviation for non-inspiring candidates, one of two things tends to be true. Either I simply missed information about a candidate that provides meaningful evidence to make them approved, or I'm correct, and those candidates are just simply uninspiring at best, or an Epstein-class puppet at worst. For those reasons, I have no intention of wasting your time in discussing those other candidates. If I missed anything and you live in Ohio, please let me know in the comments. I can add that info in a follow-up video. While I did say there are 6 candidates in the Democratic primary, we will be spotlighting 10 candidates overall running in 8 different races in Ohio. If you are a vote blue no matter who friend, we're going to have a few disagreements. I care more about policy than party, and I hope you will understand that leftists aren't trying to destroy the Democratic Party. We want to make the party better. But where there are elections without an inspiring Democratic candidate, then to fight fascism, we need to organize around every option we have available. So keep that in mind as we now discuss the secular lefty-approved candidates in Ohio. Starting in the 1st District, Damon Lynch is running against AIPAC Dem Greg Landsman. If you visit Damon's campaign website, not only does he have a well-written, clear, and bold policy agenda, he also has this useful graphic to make it extra clear who Damon plans to represent once elected to Congress. While this evidence makes him secular lefty approved and a great example of what I am looking for on other candidates' web pages, for Damon or any other approved candidate to win their primary election requires them to put in the work to meet their communities and earn their trust and votes. These spotlights will only help the candidate so much, but the work they put in will be reflected in the results on Election Day. In the 3rd District, Joe Girard is running against an AIPAC-funded geriatric incumbent. Voters in the Ohio's 3rd District, please do the right thing and vote for the better candidate who has both better policies and won't drop dead in the next year or two. In the 5th District, I have 2 candidates to spotlight for you. Daniel Burkett is the Democratic candidate and met the approval requirements. However, if Daniel is unable to win the nomination, there is an independent candidate running who will also meet the approval requirements, Dalton Franklin. We will need to see who wins the nomination after the May 5th primary, but at least the 5th District gets a backup candidate if Daniel doesn't win. If he does, then that leads to a different discussion about vote splitting. But we'll see what happens first in the primary. Next, we have another great candidate, Adrian Vitas, for Ohio's 6th District. A candidate with a great policy page, and hopefully also a candidate putting in the work and meeting with their communities in the 6th District. In the 11th District, the voters have an approved Democratic candidate, Ardelia Holmes, and an additional candidate option, running in the general election as an independent, Courtney Peterson. In the 11th district, with the evidence I have seen from both candidates so far, I would support independent Courtney Peterson, regardless who wins the Democratic primary election. Courtney Peterson is a Citizens Impeachment Courage candidate and understands the urgency of removing Trump from office, and that no other policy can be pursued until the fascists are removed from office. She is the best candidate in the 11th district, and I'm optimistic she could be the one of several independent candidates this year to win in the general election. The last Democratic candidate I will be spotlighting here in Ohio is Jared Christian, running in the 12th district. In the 15th district, there are two Democratic candidates running in the primary, but neither I found to be inspiring. Normally that is where it would have ended and I move on, but when I was looking at the names of candidates on Ballotpedia and scrolled to look at the Republicans to verify if incumbent Mike Kerry is still running, he is, but it was his primary challenger whose name I recognized. I wouldn't normally look into Republicans, but what we have here with Samuel Ronan is one of those very rare progressive Republicans. The reason why I recognize his name is because after the embarrassing loss for the Democratic Party in 2016, there was an internal party election for the DNC chair. Sam Ronan, who was 27 at the time then, was one of the candidates in the race for that chair. He was a great candidate then, continuing the Bernie Sanders message to get money out of politics. So, of course, the DNC did everything to stop him from winning, to stop him and others from making the party better. After that, I don't really remember seeing his name again, until now. I get the odds of a progressive Republican winning in the primary are not the best. However, Sam is running and at least giving Ohio voters in the 15th district a secular lefty-approved option. Granted, just in the Republican primary. Anyone in that district who is an independent or not registered, consider registering as a Republican and support Sam Ronan. If he wins against the Republican incumbent, it is very possible he then wins the general election in November. Also, Republicans have John Fetterman in the Senate, a Democrat who votes with fascists the majority of the time. So why can't we have a Republican who votes for human rights and getting money out of politics? The party is irrelevant. The policies candidates discuss, and more importantly, what those legislators vote on, is far more important than any party labels. The final race in Ohio to discuss is the Senate special election. In the Democratic primary, neither of the two candidates really inspired me. So instead, the voters of Ohio, I ask you to consider another independent candidate. After reviewing Greg Levy's campaign policy page, he has my support and would make a great senator. Now I will address the main, very scary word that Greg uses on his campaign website. He describes himself, now brace yourselves now, as a socialist. Ooh. For clarity, I'm not. I describe myself as a social democrat. But in terms of building a coalition of congressional candidates to move the American Overton window out of fascism and back to the left, it will take all of us working together to make that happen. Here's how Greg describes why we need to build a socialist movement. Every issue dealt with in this platform, and every injustice working people experience in society, boils down to the question of who has power. Under the current capitalist system, a tiny handful of ultra-wealthy bankers and corporate executives have the power and will do anything to maintain it. We stand for socialism, a system where poor and working people hold political and economic power and use it to meet the needs of all people and to preserve the planet. So many problems could be solved by measures that are common sense to any worker, but are unthinkable under the rule of the billionaires. There isn't anything he wrote there that I disagree with. Greg is exactly the kind of candidate we need more of to educate more Americans on how beneficial certain socialist policies are to the welfare of the country. We don't have to live in constant poverty, but it won't change if we keep electing servants to the billionaire Epstein class. Voters in Ohio, for the Senate race, neither Democratic candidate is worthy. Support Greg Levy and elect an independent, secular lefty-approved candidate to the Senate in November. It's important not to just flip these seats to blue, but also flip those seats with the candidates who will fight for the people, not the Epstein class. There is one final secular lefty-approved candidate I'd like to shout out before ending this video. If you watched my previous video on the March 3rd primary election results, then you'll know why I'm doing this brief segment. For those of you who missed it, I recommend checking out that full video, but here are the main points. In North Carolina's 4th District, Nadal Alam was only shy of about 1,200 votes from defeating AIPAC and AI money-taking puppet Valerie Foushee. Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House from New York's 8th District, had helped move money from AIPAC and AI donors into Foushee's campaign and other groups who bought ads to benefit her campaign. Jeffries and the Epstein class worked together to defeat Nadal Alam in North Carolina's 4th District. Now, the majority of American voters must work together and help end Hakeem Jeffries' career in New York's 8th District. New York will vote on June 23rd. Their candidate filing deadlines close on April 2nd. Currently, there is one candidate running against Hakeem Jeffries. His name is Vance Bostic, and his policy positions make him one of the better secular lefty-approved candidates. Currently, New York candidates are collecting signatures to make the primary ballot, with that deadline ending in early April. If you live in New York's 8th District and want to help with this effort, his campaign Discord link will be listed below in the description, and you can go learn more there. If Vance Bostic gets the required amount of signatures to make the primary ballot, he will need as many volunteers ready to help spread his message to reach the most voters. This year, the voters in New York's 8th District could have a choice of a candidate who will represent them, not the Epstein class. And that really is the focus of this 2026 primary election analysis series, putting in the work to help educate others of what candidates in the state will represent them or continue the policies that protect the Epstein class while the rest of us suffer and die. It's time to change the majority of our Congress members. We will see how the primary plays out on May 5th. Hopefully we can add a couple more wins to the board. So far, out of the first 3 states that voted on March 3rd, we have at least 13 and potentially as many as 16 moving on to the general election. Several candidates in Texas still have a runoff election on May 26th. Depending on my schedule, this video's release will be right before or shortly after the Illinois primary, and I am extremely excited to see how those results finalize after the March 17th primary. The next video on this channel will be another secular lefty chat discussing the Illinois results. The next states to be reviewed are Nebraska and West Virginia, who vote on May 12th. More videos will be released throughout this year for every state's primary election, so be sure to ring that bell to be notified of my newest videos to stay informed. If you found anything I said in today's video useful, please share it. Give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Let's educate and make the United States and the world a better place together. Till the next video, consider checking out my other work on this channel. If you are in a position to support an independent creator, please consider supporting my Patreon to help with these video projects. Thank you again for listening, and take care.